Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you that are not aware who I am, I'm Dick Walsh and I'm the Council Leader for Argyll and Bute Council. And it's a privilege to welcome you all here with us this evening, ladies and gentlemen, for the Scottish Cabinet public discussion. On your behalf, can I also extend a warm open welcome to the First Minister and the Scottish Cabinet. We're delighted to have them here with us in Oban, I'm sure you'll agree. Can I say it's fantastic to see you all here with us this evening, and I'm sure that we will have a full and interesting and lively debate as the evening progresses. It's been a great pleasure to welcome the members of the Scottish Cabinet in Oban today as part of their summer tour. And during their time here today, the Cabinet has been able to see some of the many positives that Oban has to offer, visiting local facilities, speaking to local businesses and staff, and no doubt meeting many of you as they've been out and about during today. I'm sure they've received a warm welcome and are looking forward to hearing more from you this evening. As you know, Oban has much to be proud of, and it's without doubt a real asset and attraction for Argyll and Bute. I well know that people in the area are passionate about their communities and are prepared to invest their time, their energy and their efforts in making them as vibrant as possible. And can I say, we really do appreciate that passion from you. Much investment is planned for Oban in terms of regeneration of the town centre, improved transport links at the airport, new rail services, and of course our new and proposed Oban High School, as well as the Lorne Arc initiative, which promises many developments and positives for our community. And of course, we need to remember that all of this has been brought about following a strong, effective partnership working with our Scottish Government colleagues. Our joint ambition is to bring more jobs and more people to live and work in Argyll and Bute. There is much to build upon, and we'll have a part to play in securing a bright future for Oban and everyone in Argyll and Bute. But tonight's public discussion is a sign also of the Scottish Cabinet's continued commitment to Oban, investing time to hear from you and to answer your questions. So with that in mind, I now hand over to Joe Fitzpatrick, MSP, and Joe is the Minister for Parliamentary Business, and he will go on with tonight's discussions. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Dick, and thanks for that warm Oban welcome. The Cabinet are delighted to be here in Oban for the 7th meeting held out with Edinburgh this year. Since coming to office, this government has been committed to holding cabinets across the length and breadth of Scotland. And last year we saw a huge increase in the engagement in politics and the involvement of people on a scale which was really unprecedented in recent history of our country. And we want to build on that. We want to build on the renewed sense of energy and enthusiasm. And tonight's about allowing you, the people, to ask any questions that you want about the Scottish Government's work or any other issues that you have that's pressing. This is your opportunity. In terms of how this evening will work, in a moment you'll hear from the First Minister, and then we'll open the floor for a formal question and answer session for about an hour. Now, as always, there'll be a lot of people wanting to ask questions, but I'll try and take as many as possible, so make sure you get your hands up as quickly as possible. Following the formal question and answer session, there'll be the opportunity for you to continue the discussion with individual Cabinet Secretaries over a cup of tea, and I hope you'll be able to join us for that. So without any further ado, would you please welcome the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, MSP.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, you sound like a lively bunch. I hope that's a sign of how things are going to go tonight. The liveliness, I mean, not the fervent applause, although you can do that as well. if you want. It's great to be here today, and me and all of my Cabinet colleagues here today are delighted to be in Oban. The sun even shone for much of today, which it hasn't done anywhere in Scotland too often over the last few weeks and months. Given that we are in Oban, I wanted to start tonight with something serious, but something very positive as well. I thought it was worth just taking the opportunity tonight to pay tribute to the Oban lifeboat, because one of the first things I heard when I arrived here this morning was that the Oban lifeboat had rescued the crew of a scallop dredger in the Sound of Mull early this morning. Now that in itself is fantastic and absolute testament to the bravery and selflessness of people who man our lifeboats. But when I read a bit more into that, I found out that that call, when they rescued that crew this morning, was the 4th call they'd had in 24 hours. Now, that's fantastic dedication. So I thought it would be good tonight to start by just giving a round of applause to all of those who keep us safe. My second thank you tonight is to all of you for coming along here. It's fantastic to see so many people on a Monday night in Oban, or anywhere for that matter, coming along to hear about politics and governance and government, to talk about the issues that matter to you. So thank you very much for coming here. Thank you also to the Atlantis Leisure Centre for hosting us this evening. Atlantis also played host to a young person summit that was here today, which I'll say a wee bit more about later on. So they've had a busy day, but have looked after all of us very well. So thank you very much to all of the staff here. And lastly, thanks to Argyll and Bute Council. Thanks to Councillor Walsh for his words of introduction. We've been incredibly well looked after today, and the hospitality and the practical help of the council has been much appreciated. So thank you very much indeed. This practice of the Cabinet getting out and about around the country is something we've been doing for quite some time now, and it's one of the ways that we're trying to meet a promise that I made when I became First Minister. And that promise was quite simple, but very important to me and very important to the Cabinet. We're determined to try to be the most accessible government that Scotland has ever had. So it follows from that the purpose of this session tonight isn't for you to listen to us, although you're going to have to listen to me for a little while longer. But the main purpose of the session is for us to listen to you. Most of the time we've got tonight is set aside for you to ask us questions. And I want to stress at the outset something that a lot of people come along here and actually find quite hard to believe. You can ask anything you want to ask tonight. We don't vet the questions or screen the questions in advance. Sometimes we wish we could, but we don't do that. You can ask anything about any subject you want, and we will do our very best to answer your question as fully, openly, and as frankly as possible. There might be things we can't answer immediately. If you've got a particularly detailed or specific question, we might need to take your details and get back to you. And there might be some questions that some people have that are a little bit personal in nature. You might not want to ask your question in front of all of the people in this hall. So if you've got something like that, I think there are forms on the seats that are available to you. Feel free to write your question down, give it to us before you leave tonight, and we'll get an answer back to you. But the key thing I'm stressing here is that tonight is an opportunity for you to tell us what matters to you, what's important to the community you live in, what questions do you want the answers to. So I hope you take this opportunity, and I hope, above all else, you enjoy the experience tonight. You might not agree with all the answers you get, you might not like some of what you hear, but I hope you enjoy the experience of being able to engage directly with your government, because we are your government and we are accountable to you. Now, I'm pretty sure if the experience of these travelling Cabinet meetings elsewhere is anything to go by, that you'll have a very, very wide range of things you want to ask tonight. So I'm not going to try and cover every topic under the sun in my opening remarks, but I do want to say just a few words, really just trying to set out for you the general approach that we're taking as a government. It might prompt some questions you've got, but above all else, it's just intended to give you a sense of who we are and where we're coming from, what we're trying to achieve for Scotland. And I want to do that setting out 3 key themes that are the hallmarks of this government: fairness, prosperity and participation. And I'll illustrate these themes just by talking about some of the things that the ministers and myself have done over the course of today. Because the ability to go out and meet local individuals and local organisations is actually one of the big benefits of taking the Cabinet on tour. Between all of us here today, we've undertaken 22 different visits and meetings across Oban over the course of the day. John Swinney visited Antella, a life sciences company here in Oban. Marco Biaggi talked to the Oban Communities Trust. Shona Robison met Argyll Voluntary Action. Shona, I think, also visited the play park just outside this centre, and that's a play park that the Scottish Government is contributing to the improvement of. And this is quite important because the money to improve that play park is coming from a fund that we established to make sure that last year's Commonwealth Games delivered better sports and recreation facilities, not just in Glasgow, but across the whole of Scotland. So that's one tangible example of the legacy of the Commonwealth Games that took place in Glasgow just over a year ago. The first visit I made when I arrived in Oban this morning was to the high school, and I see the head teacher here with us tonight. It was pretty obvious to me when I walked into the high school, in fact before I entered the building, because I was given a very special welcome that I'll come on to in a second, but it was very obvious to me very quickly what a good school Oban High School is. Obviously, it's going to see significant investment from the government over the next couple of years as a new high school is built. But it was clear from the pupils I spoke to, particularly the senior pupils, incredibly impressive, and the dedication and enthusiasm of the teachers, that Oban High School is a special learning environment. And amongst the many achievements of that school, I think it's worth mentioning 2 significant achievements just in the last months. Firstly, the students of Oban High School did absolutely brilliantly at the World Piping Championships in Glasgow. They were rated as the 2nd best school pipe band in the world. I mean, that's pretty cool. The 2nd best school pipe band in the world. So that's a massive achievement, and congratulations to them. But the reason my welcome was so special is that as I arrived this morning, they played a couple of tunes especially for me. It was absolutely lovely and a great way to start not just the day, but to start the week. So thank you to them for that. But the second achievement I thought it was worth mentioning was around the school's exam results that came out just 3 weeks ago, because in those results we saw a significant increase in the proportion of students from Oban High School gaining at least 1 higher. And the reason I mention that is partly to congratulate the school on that achievement, but also because one of the things I was doing while I was at the high school was announcing something around educational maintenance allowances. Now, many of you might have heard of educational maintenance allowances, some of you might not have. But these allowances are used widely across Scotland. Around, I think, 70 people from Oban High benefited from them last year. And what they do is provide 16 and 17-year-olds from low-income families with £30 a week if they choose to stay on in school or go to college. And they often make the crucial difference between people staying in education or leaving early. It's a relatively small sum of money, but it can make a massive difference to young people's lives. EMAs were abolished in England as part of the coalition government's cuts, but they've been retained here in Scotland. I see Mike Russell, the former Education Secretary, here, and it was a deliberate decision to retain EMAs to help those from the lowest income families further their education. So we're proud of having retained them, but today I was actually announcing that we're going to expand the availability of EMAs so that people from a wider range of income groups and courses can benefit. And what that means in practice is that whereas this year around 35,000 young people benefited, next year 57,000 young people will benefit. And that's just one of the many ways in which we're trying to promote opportunities for our young people. Reinstating free university tuition is another way, so is our investment in college buildings and our support for modern apprenticeships. Last week I made a speech about educational attainment, highlighting our commitment to ensuring that students from schools in the most deprived parts of Scotland do as well as students from the most affluent parts of Scotland. And all of that support for our young people goes alongside our broader commitment to a fairer society. And that's reflected in everything from our investment in the NHS to the efforts we're making to mitigate the impact of the Tories' welfare cuts. We want to do everything we can to ensure that nobody is left behind and that everybody gets the chance to fulfil their potential. We also believe that a fairer country will be a more prosperous country. It stands to reason, when you think about it, that if everyone has a fair chance to contribute their talents and their energy, then that's going to be good not just for individuals, but that's going to be good for our economy as a whole. And that's why our economic strategy prioritises fairness and competitiveness together. They're two sides of the same coin. And so, alongside measures to support social justice, we also promote enterprise. We want Scotland to be the best place in the whole of the UK to do business, not by some kind of race to the bottom on costs, but to making sure this is a good, attractive environment for businesses with a high-skilled population and a real focus on innovation and selling our goods and services overseas. So that's why we've got the most competitive business taxation system in the UK. The small business bonus, which was a policy we introduced when we first came to government, means that there are 4,000 business premises in Argyll and Bute alone that right now are paying no business rates or reduced business rates, because we know that small businesses are the engine of our economy. So if we give them a helping hand, then they'll help to grow our economy, create jobs and make us more prosperous. It's also why our enterprise agencies support companies in every part of the country. Highlands and Islands Enterprise provides assistance for 19 businesses and social enterprises just in and around Oban. We also, as a government, invest significantly in the infrastructure that business depends on, whether that's ferry services, rail services or road connections. If you look just at the last 8 years, we've invested more than £170 million in trunk roads of direct significance to Oban. For example, the continuing improvements we're making to the A82. And I know and appreciate that many of you will think we've got a long way still to go, and we agree with you on that. But as part of that investment in infrastructure, we're prioritising digital infrastructure. The superfast broadband project is one of the biggest engineering projects anywhere in Europe. That project involves laying more than 1,200 kilometres of fibre, including 400 kilometres along the seabed. So it's a massive project, but we're starting to see the results already here in Oban, although again, we've got a long way still to go. But around this time last year, no properties in Oban had access to superfast broadband. Since then, just over a fifth of properties have gained access, and BT will start commercial work before the end of the year that will take that proportion to over 90%. And many areas are already starting to benefit. Overall, back 2 years ago in 2013, only 4% of properties in the Highlands had access to superfast broadband. By the end of next year, that will be 84%. So that's good progress, but it's not enough. And I don't say for a minute it's enough. And that's relevant to one of the other visits I made here today to the Phoenix Cinema, which, as many of you will know, is a fantastic place. Unfortunately, they didn't let me stay long enough to see a film and have popcorn, but I'll definitely be back. Incidentally, one thing I didn't know until today, and I don't know how many of you know this, the Phoenix Cinema is now the only cinema anywhere in Scotland that is an accredited living wage employer. Please, all its staff, the living wage. Now, it's already got good Wi-Fi, but it's going to benefit hugely from superfast broadband. But while I was there, I also launched a new scheme as part of the Scottish Rural Development Programme. It's worth £9 million, which will more than double our investment in community broadband. because what that does is allow communities which aren't likely to be covered by the current expansion of superfast broadband to work on innovative projects that will meet their own areas. And that's important because broadband access is so and increasingly so important to the way we live our lives. So expanding its availability is a really important priority for this government, particularly expanding its availability in rural areas. And the third visit I just wanted to touch on combines both these themes of prosperity and fairness. I went to the new affordable housing development in Glenshellock and met a couple there who'd moved there because the previous accommodation on the top floor of a flat wasn't suitable for them anymore. And their new home is making a massive difference to their quality of life. And that development is providing 57 new homes. It's part of a much wider housing programme across Scotland, which has seen us build almost 27,000 new affordable homes across the last 4 years. And we have a target by the time we get to the election next year of hitting 30,000 new affordable homes, and we're on track to do that. And that new housing has an important social impact, but it's also got a big economic impact. If you take the development I visited today, it's been carried out by a local firm, McLeod Construction, and the construction phase is supporting 50 local jobs. So the economic benefits continue after construction has been completed, because good quality housing encourages people to stay and work in the local area. So it's another example. You know, people often question what good public money that government invests, which comes from all of you in the first place, what good it does. Well, that's a good example of how public investment, whether it's in infrastructure, housing, providing opportunities for young people, can help communities in every part of Scotland to be successful. And the final thing I want to talk about brings us back to some of the issues I raised near the start: opportunities for young people and being an accessible government. As I said earlier on, many of the ministers here attended a youth summit held in this centre this afternoon, and that was round about 100 young people from all over the north of Scotland together to discuss the issues that they felt are important to them. And I think hearing the voice of young people like that is so important. You know, one of the great successes of the referendum campaign last year, in my view, was the decision to give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote, because they proved themselves to be informed, responsible, concerned citizens. We always thought they would be, but they proved it beyond any doubt. But they were just one part of a wider surge of democratic engagement. One of the great things overall about the last couple of years in Scotland is the way in which all of us think about and make a decision on the future of our country. And that unleashed an enormous amount of empowerment and engagement and interest in the political process. So one of the things we're trying to do as a government is harness that energy, that sense of engagement, so that we can use it to tackle the day-to-day issues that we grapple with in communities like Oban and right across the rest of the country. We've taken some is that I get to choose who has to answer your questions. So prepare for that. Enjoy it. I do. So please enjoy it. Thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to our discussions.
Okay, thank you, First Minister. So we'll now move to the question and answer session. So I'm going to take questions in batches of 3. So I'll ask people to put your hands up. A microphone will come to you, and then after the 3 questions have been asked, the First Minister and whoever she decides will answer the questions. Now, we do normally have more questions than time, so make sure you get your hands up early. I'll try and take as many as possible. If people could keep their questions as tight as possible, I'm going to try and get... there's more people here than I think we've had in a long time, if not ever, so we're going to try and get as many questions in as possible. So if people could put their hands up, and I'll take the lady here, yep, and the gentleman just here. So the lady first, yeah, yep.
Sue Pagan, Alzheimer's Scotland's recently appointed dementia advisor in Oban. There's been a great improvement in recognising the rights of people with dementia to have the best quality of life and the best quality of care in Scotland over recent years, which was something that you, First Minister, kicked off in your time as Cabinet Secretary for Health. I'd like to ask you if you will commit to dementia remaining a national priority, and will you support the creation and implementation of a third national dementia strategy, as the current strategy actually ends next year? Because there's still a lot to be done. Not enough people are being diagnosed, and those that are, it's often too late for effective support to maximise their quality of life. Also, post-diagnostic support is proving really effective where it's happening, but too many people still don't have access to the type of quality post-diagnostic support that we know has a positive impact on people's lives and on their future health and care needs, despite the Scottish Government's world-leading and world-famous guarantee. Thank you.
Okay, and then the gentleman just here.
My question is about equality.
Sorry, could you say your name?
Sorry, it's Ian Johnston. My question is about equality. We've heard a lot of this recently, both by the government and the First Minister. But what we've not seen is parity in the discussion in terms of discussing equal rights for all, including men. So some recent figures from the Office of National Statistics state that if a man gets cancer, he's 40 times more likely to die than a woman. More men die of prostate and bowel cancer than all women die of all cancer. And there's no national screening as there is for breast cancer or cervical cancer. That, to me, lacks equality. And lastly, the ultimate ceiling around equality is that women live 5 to 8 years longer than men. And surely these should be priorities rather than the take-home pay or the power basis if we're talking about equality.
Okay, thank you. And one more question. Okay, there's a gentleman, I think, just right over at the side. Yep. No, the...
Is this on now? My name's Kenny McNabb. I'm chairman of the Clyde Fishermen's Association. I've got a question on marine protected areas. We went through a 3-year consultation process, and we took part in the whole process. The fishing industry want marine protected areas, want to make that quite clear, and we thought we had reached agreement. Since then, our Minister, Mr Lockhead, has announced proposals for marine protected areas, and they go way beyond anything that we discussed. With Mr Lockhead, and he hasn't got back to us yet to say if he's going to give us any more time, because we have to now do a socio-economic study to see how badly the small coastal communities in the west coast of Scotland are going to be affected. And we've found, after a few weeks of delving into it, it's going to be very serious. There are many businesses and many jobs in the line here. And because of the Minister's ambition, and he doesn't have any of that socio-economic information, it's very scant what he has, which is quite obvious, because you already have had over 220 responses over the last 2 or 3 weeks to say that some of these people will lose maybe 30 to 40% of their turnover in their businesses. And I was very heartened to hear the First Minister say that fairness and prosperity are high on her agenda. Well, we feel in the small coastal communities in the west coast of Scotland that's not the case. And I would beg the Minister and the Cabinet to give us more time to do a proper socio-economic study, which should have been done in the first place.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
These are three really important questions. I'm sorry, the lady who asked the first question, I didn't catch your name. Sue. I'm going to ask Shona, the Health Secretary, to answer Sue's question about dementia, which is a hugely important issue. Ian, your question, very important, range of different issues in there, but all under the banner of equality for men. Alec Neil has overall responsibility for equality, so I'm going to ask him to answer your question. And then Kenny, I don't think there's any escape for Richard Lockhead when it comes to answering your question. So Shona, do you want to kick off?
Well, the dementia strategy is very, very important because it delivers so many practical things for people with dementia and, of course, their carers, who we must remember are also really, really important in this. So we've managed to have within our hospitals, for example, dementia champions who look out for the interests of people with dementia, because we know that being in hospital can be a very, very difficult place for someone with dementia. And actually, we want to really shorten the time someone with dementia spends in hospital, because it's not the best place for them, because they lose a lot of their independent skills that they have. So the dementia strategy is really important, and yes, it does come to an end next year, but I can assure the audience that we are absolutely determined to refresh and work on a new strategy for next year and beyond, and we want to hear people's views. So at the moment, we're having a national conversation across Scotland, and I spoke to the good people of Argyll Voluntary Action today, who are supporting many people with dementia and others who require that support in the community, to encourage them to take part in the national conversation, which is about the future of our health and care services, including people with dementia. And one of the important developments we've seen recently is the integration of health and care, because for people with dementia, or anyone else for that matter, it shouldn't matter whether you're getting a service from the NHS or a service from the council. It should be together a seamless service. And of course, this is the first year of the shadow year of the integrated joint boards, and I think that will make a real difference to people's lives. So I hope I've given some reassurance. Early diagnosis, post-diagnostic support for carers, and making sure that we can keep people safe living within their own home and their communities for as long as possible. And I could just quickly say to the gentleman on men's health, we've got the Detect Cancer Early campaign with the Get Checked, which is why I'm wearing the checked scarf today, as a part of that, and it's very much focused on some of the messages that Alec Ferguson and others have been promoting about men getting their health checked early, particularly around things like lung and colorectal cancer, because we know that sometimes men can wait a bit too long before they go to the doctor, and it's a really important campaign to get that message across. So we are very conscious of the needs of men's health, but there's always more to do, and we'll certainly listen to your points in that regard.
Do you want to take the wider equality point?
Yes, can I give you the more general answer? Can I first of all say that equality by definition means that where men have an advantage over women, we want to bring the women up, and where women have an advantage over men, we want to bring the men up. Let me give you two examples of each, one of each. One is the wage gap between men and women in Scotland and indeed in the UK. Now, I'm old enough to remember when Barbara Castle passed the Equal Pay Act. That's over 30 years ago, and yet the gap between men and women's pay is actually increasing again. That's very unfair, because we're talking about the same job very often. And indeed, the local authorities, if I may say so, across Scotland are only now getting to the point where they're all implementing equal status and equal pay, and we want to see that be completed as soon as possible, as well as, if we had the powers in the private sector, to do more, and similarly with women's representation on the board of companies. So that's an example of where we need to do much more, and we wish we had the power to do much more than we're actually doing to bring women's wages up to the level of men's and representation on boards. Conversely, one of the areas I'm responsible for is domestic abuse. Now, the vast majority of incidences of domestic abuse in Scotland are inflicted on women. They are the victims and men are the culprits. But there is a small number of men, representing about 12% of all domestic abuse cases in Scotland. And one of the things we've done as a government which is unprecedented, is that we have provided services, including a helpline for abused men, as well as services for abused women. Because in that example, there wasn't enough service provision for men. And the final point I'd make, to just add to what Shona said in the health-related issues, is that health decisions are based on need. So if there's a need to spend more on one particular type of research, one particular type of cancer, vis-a-vis another type of cancer, then clearly we have to do that, because the objective, again, is for men and women to lead not equally long lives, but equally fit lives as well.
Okay. You raised an issue about health screening, which when I was Health Secretary was raised with me a lot about, because I think all of the screening programmes are for cancers that are particularly associated with women, although not exclusively so. We follow advice on screening programmes, so we don't make these decisions in isolation. There's a committee that issues clinical advice. And one of the cancers where there's often been calls for screening is around prostate cancer. The reason there isn't a national screening programme there is not because it is a cancer that affects men. It's because there's a lot of clinical concern about false positives if you did a screening programme on a national basis. So these are decisions that are very much driven by clinical opinion and medical evidence. But I hope some of what we've said reassures you that equality goes across the piece. It's not just about highlighting equality for one group, it's about looking at where any group in society faces disadvantage and trying to overcome that. Can I
There is voluntary screening you can go, but we only saw the advancement in terms of breast cancer and cervical cancer when it was much more positively put out.
I think that's fair.
Put out, and once people reached a certain age, they were invited in for screening. That's not happened. And the last bit nobody answered, which is the differential in lifespan. You know, it's a big difference. I want to live as long as a woman. You know, I want equality.
You look pretty healthy to me.
I want to reach.
Right. Can I
reach that glass ceiling.
Can I just, as a general rule tonight, Joe's going to be quite strict on this in terms of people having follow-up questions. Because if we start doing that, we won't get all questions in. But the points you raise are right. There's a big cultural thing about getting men to go to the doctor and get diagnosed earlier, and that's why what Shona's saying about the Detect Cancer Early programme is so important, because that's one of the things we're doing to try to deal with that. But you look to me as if you're going to live for a long, long time, unless we really infuriate you in not answering your questions. Right, Richard's hoping that we keep talking about men's health so that he doesn't have to talk about marine protected areas, but it's over to you, Richard.
Thank you, First Minister. I'm delighted to talk about marine protected areas because it's really important to the future of our marine environment. And thank you, Ken, for your question. We've had several discussions over the last few months, along with the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, whom I did get back to and explain that we will continue to take feedback from the industry up until the final decisions are taken in September, which is effectively the second extension of the consultation. The reason why we're having marine protected areas in Scotland is that we are the fourth biggest shareholder of Europe's seas. And over the last few decades, scientific discovery has shown us what lies beneath the waves. And society wants to protect the unique species and habitats we have in the seabeds. That's why the Parliament passed the Marine Act for Scotland, which enables us to establish marine protected areas, a network of them, around Scottish waters. So there's now 30 areas designated because of their unique, special habitats and species beneath the waves. We don't see them, but they play a very important part in the health of our waters and fish stocks and ecosystem. Now we're consulting on how to manage each individual MPA, because the scientific advice tells us that in some cases, to protect these fragile seabeds, we have to have restrictions on the most invasive kind of activities. That's why in some of the MPAs there are proposals to restrict, for instance, scallop dredging, which are the big steel mechanisms that go in the seabed and can cause damage, or indeed in some cases some trawling as well. The estimated economic impact of that is between 1 and 1.6% of the revenues of the relevant fleets. However, with our discussions with the fishing industry, and Ken in particular, we have heard that in some cases there could be a disproportionate impact on some particular vessels. And that's why we've given this extra time to get the economic feedback, so we can take that into account before we put our final proposals to Parliament in September, which will then go through parliamentary scrutiny. A lot of people tell me our proposals don't go far enough. We're not doing enough to protect the marine protected areas under proposals. And other people, like Ken, for very legitimate reasons, tell me we're going too far. So it's really important we strike the right balance. So we have to have a viable fishing industry, and we believe that the economic impact is proportionate, but we'll look at making changes if we have to. But we absolutely have to, as the fourth biggest shareholder of Europe's seas, protect Scotland's very precious marine environment.
Okay, another round of questions, but as the First Minister said, if people could really keep their questions tight, and then if you do have follow-up questions, there'll be an opportunity to speak to individual Cabinet Secretaries. If folk keep taking up the time, it means other people won't get to ask their question. The lady there, yep, but not in front. I saw you earlier on, actually, with the white, yeah, the white piping, yeah.
Good evening, Cabinet. My name is Marina Curran-Coulthart. I'm a director of a small business based on land engineering. My question for the Cabinet is based on Affair of Scotland and relating to logistics. We have to buy in raw materials and we seem to be in a postcode lottery. And that doesn't obviously balance out in terms of Argyll and Bute wanting to grow the economy and make our business more sustainable. In terms of influence, costs of delivery seems to be extortionate, and I would like to know how the government are going to balance this out. Thank you.
Okay, and then the gentleman here.
My name's Eric Jesperson, and thanks for coming. And I'm glad you recognise that Oban is a buzzing town, and that there's a whole lot of people that give their own free time to keep it that way. I've been privileged to be a GP in Oban for the last 26 years. Our practice has grown to having over 11,000 patients. We offer 1,200 GP, nurse and telephone consultations a week, and you still can't get an appointment. One of the things that I wanted to ask about was that we have 10 partners. We've managed to recruit a new GP from England, a very experienced GP, just recently at the beginning of this year. We've managed to employ a GP who's just finished her training. We have 2 enthusiastic GP registrars working alongside with us. 4 of our 10 partners are in their mid to late 50s. And when I look at things like the GP services in Mull, the equally excellent practice in Connaught who's lost 3 partners in the last 18 months, and other practices across Scotland who've had to close their lists, I do worry about what the future might hold. I am aware that Shona is very aware of this, and when she opened the national conversation, she said that the time is ripe for a complete revolution in primary care. Quote from the Dundee Courier, no less. What I would like to ask Shona is, what would this revolution look like? And can I be confident that in 3 to 5 years' time, my practice will remain as successful as I think it is today?
Okay, and is there a question up the back there? Up there, yep. Lady in yellow, yep.
Hi, sorry, my name's Aisling Clark, and I want to ask about education and how the First Minister and the Cabinet are going to approach this gap in the attainment levels across Scotland. When we're at a stage in Scotland, we've lost over 4,000 teachers. We haven't kept to promised minimum class sizes in the early years, or S1 and S2 for maths and literacy, and we've lost 130,000 college places. And at the moment, we're looking at the lowest levels of maths and literacy across Scotland. I would like to know how the Cabinet's planning to tackle those problems, not just for the deprived areas, but for right across Scotland.
Can I say firstly, the acoustics coming at us are not fantastic. They might not be great going in the opposite direction. So if I'm mishearing anybody's name and get your name wrong, I apologise, okay? I'm just trying to grasp it. I think the first question was from Marie, was that right? Yeah. I'm going to ask John to answer that about small businesses and the costs of logistics here in Argyll and Bute. Then Eric, your very timely question about primary care and GP recruitment, I'm going to hand to Shona. And was it Ashley? Yeah. I'm going to pass your question with the various different strands about education to Angela. So John, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, if I could start off on the issues around small business. What we've tried to do as a government is use the areas under our control to try to address some of the circumstances that you face. So, for example, the small business bonus scheme, as the First Minister set out, has been a long-standing commitment which has reduced the business rates of companies so that we endeavour to reduce the costs that companies face in every geography of the country. So there'll be thousands of businesses in the Argyll and Bute area that will be benefiting from lower business rates as a consequence of that. When you then look at measures such as the rollout of digital connectivity, one of the priorities we've put in from our expenditure is to make sure that the rollout of that connectivity, which would not be taking place commercially, now takes place to as vast an area as we possibly can do, and we're working to complete that programme in partnership with BT over the next couple of years. So we use the powers that we have to try to ensure that our businesses are able to overcome some of the challenges of geography. And of course, digital connectivity is a very significant factor, and that's why it's so important that we have that rolled out in all localities in rural Scotland so that we can use that mechanism to overcome some of the challenges of geography. There will, however, be other examples such as logistical costs and cost of deliveries which are not immediately within the confines of our responsibilities as government, and they are the subject of regulation by the UK government. And what I want to assure you about is that on every occasion we have, we take forward steps to ensure that we press the UK government to put in place the correct regulatory environment to make sure these costs are made fair and made equitable across the country. Now, we will be acquiring some powers over certain aspects of consumer rights with the rollout of the Smith Commission powers over the next couple of years. And we would certainly use any powers we get in that respect to make sure that the issues about which you're concerned are properly taken into account. But very recently, Fergus Ewing has, as the Enterprise Minister working in my team, has made strong representations to the UK government and also to the delivery companies about the extent of which delivery costs are used in a prejudicial fashion against people in rural areas, where, in a sense, the flip side of digital connectivity is that if you're able to access the world in a fair and equitable fashion in that direction, you should be able to receive the goods in a fair and equitable fashion in return. And that's the mainstay of the argument we take forward to try to change the regulatory regime to address the issues about which you're concerned.
Okay, and Shona.
Well, first of all, congratulations on what's a successful practice, and obviously it's working well for your patients. And in fact, I heard very good things about local practices from the Argyll Voluntary Action people today, some very good feedback. But you've highlighted some issues in your own practice, and it's certainly an issue across many practices in Scotland, and that is some of the difficulties in recruiting and retaining GPs. Many are reaching retirement age. Some of the recent pension changes have speeded up GPs taking retirement before perhaps they had planned. So we have to do more to attract young doctors into general practice. I think there's been a big change in that many young doctors are choosing other specialisms instead of general practice, and we have to understand why. And I think one of the issues is that general practice is seen to be difficult, the workload seems to be hard, and that there's not maybe the variation in practice. So we need to promote general practice to young doctors. So we've taken some short-term action to help address the situation. So we've made changes to the existing contract to reduce bureaucracy, and we've also put £60 million in over the next 3 years to reduce the workload of GPs and to help bring in pharmacy support to GPs, because we know that GPs spend a lot of their time doing things that other health professionals can do, like managing medicines and so on. But the long term is really a discussion we've been having with the Royal College of General Practitioners, the BMA and others, and GPs across Scotland, that we want to have, which is where the revolution quote came from, because we need to change the way primary care is delivered. It's very bureaucratic through the existing contract, and I'll not bore you with the details, but it's quite bureaucratic, and it's about pound, shilling and pence rather than helping to deliver the model of care that we need. So the vision would be something around a community health hub, which sounds not too far off what's been delivered in your practice, but really a wider health team being supported by the GP as a clinical expert, but actually those skills being utilised to their full. So it might be a nurse, it might be a pharmacist, it might be an allied health professional that you would see, and allowing the GP to spend more time with those patients that they need to spend more time with, maybe some of the people with dementia and other complex conditions. So the GP would be able to spend more time with those patients while other patients are looked after by the most appropriate health professional. Some of the models that exist at the moment also have beds available to the GPs to be able to give somebody perhaps a bit of TLC, an assessment over a weekend. Those are the types of ideas we're looking at, so that people get more of their health care from primary care and having to go for less of their health care to the acute hospitals. So we're going to test all of this out, and we're going to do it with cooperation with GPs, so nothing to worry about. We want to make things better, not just for GPs, but obviously most importantly for the patients that receive services. So we look forward to speaking to you more about this, but it will be a model that we hope we can develop on and develop your practice along those lines, and help you to continue to provide the excellent care that you obviously do provide to your patients.
Okay. Angela.
Thank you. Ashley raises a number of issues that cut across our entire education system. And if I can start by very simply saying that our three priorities right across education is to improve standards for every child, but crucially for children from our more disadvantaged communities, to close that gap in attainment that exists between the children from the least and most disadvantaged households. And we've been very clear that our ambition isn't just to narrow that gap, it's actually to close that gap. And thirdly, we want to tackle inequality wherever it exists in our education system. And that's why we're starting with the early years, increasing expansion in early learning and childcare, all the work we're doing in primary schools and secondary schools, to the work that we're doing through the Widening Access Commission to improve access to university, because we're clear in this government that we want every child in every community to have every prospect of success, irrespective of the path that they choose. Saying all that, our number one priority is to close the attainment gap. I can point to evidence over the past 5-6 years. 5 years ago, children from the most deprived areas, 2 out of 10 of those children and young people would achieve at least one higher. And while there has been significant progress, that figure is nearly 4 out of 10 children from the most deprived areas achieve at least one higher. But when we look at the children from the least deprived areas, that figure rises to 8 out of 10. So it's clear to me that children from our more deprived areas do half as well as children from the more affluent areas. And that isn't a problem that's unique to Scotland, it's an issue across the developed world, but nonetheless we're determined to tackle it head on. And we're doing that via a variety of sources. Firstly is to target some resources. A few months ago, the First Minister announced at the Scottish Attainment Challenge £100 million investment targeted at the areas where there is the highest proportion of children from households that are living in poverty. And last week, the First Minister announced that there were other schools and other local authorities to benefit from the Attainment Challenge, and there are now 300 primary schools, including one in Argyll and Bute, that will benefit from that fund. It is also crucial that we take a very cool and calm eye over the evidence. We're not interested in ideology or politics. We are purely and simply interested in the evidence about what works to close that attainment gap. And the First Minister in a few weeks' time will speak about the National Improvement Framework. And I'll just quickly touch on the point that you make with regards to teacher numbers. Since 2011, teacher numbers have broadly stabilised in Scotland, and this year we've been absolutely clear that we are prepared to invest £51 million additional resource to maintain teacher numbers, but I suppose we've taken a different tact with local authorities. For local authorities who don't meet the target, there is the risk of a clawback of resources, and some of the resource that we're prepared to invest will only be paid upon achieving the pupil-teacher ratio and maintaining teacher numbers. There are other issues in terms of class sizes. I'm pleased to say that class sizes of primary 1 children and class sizes over 25 have been virtually eliminated. In terms of college places, we made a manifesto commitment to provide 116,000 full-time equivalent places in our college, and we make no apology for a refocus in the college sector towards full-time courses that lead to recognised qualifications, that increases the work prospects of young people. And given that youth employment is at the highest level since 2005, I do think that that's a vindication that our programme of college reform is now paying dividends.
Okay, everything that we do is also online, so we've also been asking people to submit questions through social media. So we've had a number of questions from Facebook and Twitter, so I'm going to take just 3 of them. The rest will all be answered as well. But the first one is from Christopher Chisholm, and he's raising concerns about the road closure at the A83 after a breakdown or accident, and references an example of the road being closed for 8 hours to await arrival of forensics. A second one from Fiona Shelvin-Cowan, who asks why police and other emergency services still pay VAT, and can the Scottish Government not lobby the UK Government so that we're not the only country in the UK that has to pay VAT on emergency services. And a third one from Dr. Bob Irvin, who's a CEO of a small business near Oban in renewables, and he's asking what the Scottish Government can do to support renewable energy in the wake of the UK Government pulling the plug on its support.
These 3 before we... Okay,
yep.
Right. Keith, where's Keith? I'll ask Keith to answer the point about the road closure. The question about police and VAT, which is something we are lobbying hard, the UK Government on, I'll ask Michael to say a word about, and then John, do you want to take the point about renewable energy? Keith.
I think the first thing to say on a very serious road incident, obviously the road being closed for a long period of time can be very frustrating for people, but the roads are only closed by the police. The government has no power to close a road. The police decide when to close a road. And the reason that they do that and the reason they take their time is because they have to assemble evidence which will stand up in court, and that can take some time to assemble that evidence. And then, of course, afterwards there's a need to clear up after the accident and sometimes to carry out repairs. What we have done with the police is to help them with laser equipment, which allows them to take all the evidence that they need. There's a 360 laser that takes all the evidence to see where cars or vehicles have ended up, and skid patterns and so on as well. So we've tried to do that to help that be done as quickly as possible. It can be frustrating, but it's absolutely important, especially when you get to the stage of possible proceedings, that the police have the right evidence to do that. But we'll continue to work with them to make sure that where possible we can minimise the delay. I know there were 2 very lengthy diversions over the weekend because of accidents in this part of the country. I know how frustrating that can be, but it is important that we try and get the evidence right, because obviously that helps in future to prevent further accidents as well.
Okay, Michael.
Well, it may come as a surprise to some people that the police service and fire service in Scotland are the only police and fire service in the whole of the UK who are required to pay VAT to Her Majesty's Treasury in London. And the reason the UK Government have said that is because we have a single police force and a single fire service. But let me just put some financial context around this. For our fire service in Scotland, they pay around £10 million worth in VAT to the Treasury. That's equivalent to some 350 firefighters. Our police service in Scotland pays between £25 and £30 million in VAT each year to the Treasury in London. That's equivalent to approximately 1,000 support staff to our police service here in Scotland. Now, the reason the Treasury say that we have to pay VAT is on the basis that we have a single police force and that we have a single fire service. That may appear to be logical on the surface of it until you look at it in a bit more detail. For some reason, Her Majesty's Treasury in London has saw fit to give the London Olympic Legacy Organisation, a national organisation, VAT exemption. It gives Highways England, a national organisation, VAT exemption. And it also gives the Northern Ireland Police Service and the Northern Ireland Fire Service VAT exemption, despite the fact, again, they're a national service. This is costing us a significant amount of money each year, £10 million for our fire service and almost £30 million for our police service. And the way in which we cover that is that we as a Scottish Government give them money in order to cover this money they have to pay to the Treasury. We have repeatedly made requests to the UK Government for almost 3 years now to stop the discrimination against what I believe is the fire and the police service here in Scotland in having to pay VAT. I've made representation, the Deputy First Minister has made representations on this matter. And in our view, our police and fire service in Scotland should be treated on an equal footing with that of the other police and fire services across the UK, and we should be VAT exempt. And you can be assured, Fiona, that we as a government will continue to press that case in order to make sure we get treated with equality here in Scotland.
Okay.
Dr Oban raised a question about the support the government gives to renewables, and I think this is probably one of the areas where we have we found ourselves in the most difficult situation with the UK government post the general election in May, because the UK government has dramatically changed the support in place which is within their competence and responsibility for renewable energy. And our estimate is that about 70% of affected developments as a consequence of that rather arbitrary change in direction will be located here in Scotland. And we think that's very damaging, given the fact that we have a commitment to reduce our carbon emissions, to generate our electricity from renewable sources, and to ensure that we pursue a balanced and a sustainable energy policy. So we're making very strong representations to the UK Government. On the 21st of September, the Secretary of State for Energy, Amber Rudd, will be in Scotland for a meeting with Fergus Ewing, the Energy Minister, and we will be making the strongest possible arguments for a change to the announcements that have been made by the UK Government, who seem to be basically taking a pretty hostile attitude, despite the evidence, towards various forms of renewable power generation, particularly onshore wind. Now, we believe there is a role for onshore wind within the energy policy, but there's also room for a variety of other means of renewable energy development. And earlier on today, I had the pleasure, along with Michael Russell, to be at the opening of the Merck Hydro scheme at Loch Fyne. And that's a very special project because it's a community renewables project where the community will be is involved in co-investing the development, but as a consequence the community will be benefiting with about £60,000 of revenue every year, which can be reinvested in community development and pursuing economic opportunities in quite a fragile locality within the area. And for us, renewables is a perfect opportunity here in the Highlands and Islands to secure that type of economic opportunity that can make a real difference to the lives of individuals in Scotland. So you can be assured of this government's determination to do all that we can within the powers available to us to support and to expand the rollout of renewable energy within Scotland, but also to press the UK government not to take forward this knee-jerk policy reaction on renewables, but to allow us to take forward a sustainable and balanced energy policy that reduces emissions and gives us security of energy supply in the years to come.
Okay, more questions? Right, the lady there, yep, with the paper up, yep.
Helen Anderson. My question is about Karl Mack. Karl Mack is in the blood of many of the people in the west coast of Scotland. Over many decades, Karl Mack has demonstrated a long-term commitment to the west coast and islands by providing a high-quality service as well as long-term employment for people in Oban and other mainland and island communities. If you accept another tender, what steps will you take to ensure that the company that wins the contract will continue to provide this high-quality service, this long-term commitment to the local communities, and not just make a quick buck and disappear? There is a fear here that this would create a significant loss of permanent jobs and income for the West Coast and its islands, and risk cuts in service. What reassurance can you give us to dispel this fear?
Okay. Another question? Yeah, the guy there with the blue check. Yeah.
Hello, my name's Thomas. I'm a teacher in the school. We actually met this morning, First Minister. My question is simply, in 10 years' time, in 2025, what would be your ideal vision of how Scottish education will look for someone starting, say, Oban High School, in 10 years' time? What would be the kind of pinnacle of Scottish schools to equip them for the workplace and for the 21st century? That's it.
Okay, we've had a teacher. Is there anybody who's at Oban High School that wants to ask a question? Yeah, there we go. Right at the front.
I'm Callum. My question's actually about the recent GM crop ban from the Scottish Government. Given the Scottish Government's strong record on supporting scientific development in Scotland, are there any plans to continue to support research in this area with the view that the ban could be reconsidered should any worries be put to rest from this research? Thanks.
Okay. Right. Helen, I'm going to answer your question myself because although Keith, who's the Minister responsible, might want to add something. But I want to do my best to give people here the kind of assurance you're asking for, because we all understand how important ferry services are to people who live in communities like Oban. You know, they are lifeline services. So we understand the importance of it. Obviously, we're in a tender process just now, so we've got to be slightly careful about what we say, not to prejudice that process in one way or another. But there's just 3 points I want to make here. Firstly, we're not putting this service out to tender because we want to. We are legally obliged to do so. And trust me, we have looked very, very, very closely and carefully at this. Now, we get criticised by the opposition just now for having put this service out to tender, which seems a bit odd because they put it out to tender when they were in government, and when we criticised them for it, which we did at the time, their answer was they're legally obliged to do it. Now, that's a bit of political game playing that they did and we did, but the fact of the matter is it's a legal requirement under European law, and if we didn't do that, and if we were found to be in breach of European law, then the implications, financial implications for our ferry services would potentially be very, very severe. The second point is, this will remain a public service contract, whoever ends up operating it. It's not a service that is going to be privatised. It is a public service contract. The tender is for who operates the public service contract, which leads me on to my third point, is that we as government, notwithstanding the requirement to put it out to tender, we set the terms and conditions of that contract, which is why we can give you assurances around the quality of the service, fares, timetables, the terms and conditions that matter so much. In fact, we, previously, a few weeks ago, had some discussions with the unions about doing more to protect the terms and conditions, including the pension rights of people who work in CalMac right now. So these are the assurances I want to give. Notwithstanding the tender, notwithstanding the reasons why we have to do it, we are under no illusion about the importance of these services to the communities like the one you're living in, and we take this very, very seriously indeed. I'm tempted to answer the second one as well, actually, but I better not answer them all myself. But I'm going to ask Angela to answer your question, Thomas. But can I say today, I was so impressed with Oban High School, and I'm not just saying that because yourself and the head teacher and no doubt some pupils are here. In 2025, firstly, Oban High School will be in a brand new building. Well, it'll be probably a few years old by then, but a new facility. I'm sure all schools will look different in terms of the technology and how young people learn to how they look today. But I tell you what I'm in no doubt about, that the quality of our education, as it is today, will be largely dependent on the quality of the teachers who are in schools teaching our young people. And that's why one of the things we're doing just now is investing so much in the professional development of teachers through Teaching Scotland's Future, the College of Educational Leadership, the new master's qualification for head teachers. All of that is about recognising that in 10 years' time, just as today, unless we've got a highly qualified, highly motivated teaching profession, then we won't have the quality of education we want. So that will be a cornerstone. And lastly, 10 years from now, I do want us to be able to say, firstly, as we always have been able to say in the past, that we've got an education system that is world class, that there's nowhere better in the world to be educated than here in Scotland. And I definitely want us to be able to say that we have significantly closed the educational attainment gap. I'm under no illusions how difficult that will be, because many of the things that drive that gap don't happen in schools. They're about poverty, they're about disadvantage, but we must see our schools as one of the places where we overcome that disadvantage. So that's why, as Angela set out earlier on, we're putting so much focus through the attainment challenge, through many of the other things we're doing, starting in primary school, to say that we're going to use our education system to overcome that advantage, so that that gap that we talk about today and that, you know, is really not something to be ashamed of today, is something that we can turn around. So a world-class education system in world-class facilities with world-class teachers providing world-class education, not just for some kids, but for all kids, regardless of their background. That's my vision for the future of Scottish education. And lastly, I am going to hand over to Richard on GM.
Thank you. It's a very good question, Callum. Very topical at the moment. The fact that the Scottish Government has announced we're going to take advantage of new European Union rules that will allow Scotland to opt out of GM crops authorised at European level. And I was just reading on Reuters news agency on social media on the way to the hall tonight that Germany are being reported as about to apply to opt out of GM crops as well. So I think Scotland here So I think Scotland's sending out a good message to the rest of the world that we want to be in the vanguard of protecting a good reputation we have for food and drink in this country. And our food and drink industry has grown enormously over the last few years. It's a phenomenal success story, very important to Argyll and the Highlands and Islands in particular. We want to protect that success story. The food and drink industry in Scotland has grown by over 20% over 4 years alone, compared to about 8% across the UK. And we did that without GM crops. And I believe we should not jeopardise our unique selling point, which is the image we have around the world and in this country for natural food and drink, and the provenance and the story behind that that gets us a premium in the marketplace. Because Scotland, we can't compete with the American GM crops. Where we can compete is in high-value food and drink products. That's where the profit is, that's where the demand is for the Scottish provenance, and we absolutely have to protect that. That's notwithstanding some of the ongoing concerns there are over the long-term implications of GM for the environment and other issues, and of course, where the power lies over the future of our food systems if we start becoming dependent on GM seeds. In terms of science, which was the core part of your question, we very much value the science we have in Scotland. We do have a world-renowned reputation for outstanding science and have led the way. The science in GM Scotland can and should continue. It will continue the way it is at the moment in laboratories and in enclosed environments. Of course, not in terms of GM crops. So that science can continue. My portfolios alone fund to the tune of tens of millions of pounds agriculture and food and environment research. And that includes funding, for instance, the James Hutton Institute. So we want to remain in the vanguard of the best science in the world, but we also want to remain in the vanguard of producing the food and drink with the best premium in image and provenance in the world as well.
Please. Yep, lady right at the front here.
My name's Morag. My question is, Mr Lockhead saw the benefits of Stramash Outdoor Nursery this morning. Stramash provides fantastic opportunities for outdoor learning for the children and young people of Scotland. What are the government going to do to help spread the great work Stramash does across Scotland? Thank you.
Okay, gentleman here.
Simpson, my question is, we have one of the highest stillbirth rates in the developed world. What can the Scottish Government do to support the NHS and other organisations to combat this?
Okay, and right at the back, lady right, yep, beside the, yep.
Hi there, I'm from Oban High School and I can echo how lovely it was to see the First Minister in the high school this morning. The kids were delighted. My question is really about how do we capitalise on the enthusiasm, the excitement and the broad consensus that our 16 and 17-year-olds have about wanting to be involved in politics. So does the government have any plans for helping to ensure that our young people get registered to vote?
Okay. Morag, since Richard was there this morning at Stramash, that's a brilliant name for the outdoor nursery, I'll ask Richard to talk a bit about it and what we might be able to do to help expand that. So I didn't catch the name of the person who asked about stillbirth rates, but I'll pass that to Shona. And then the question about 16 and 17-year-olds. John's just recently passed the legislation in Parliament to give 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote next year in the Scottish Parliament elections. So I'll ask John to answer that question. Richard.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I will do is speak to Angela Constance and tell her how brilliant Stramash were in terms of preschool education in particular. Stramash, of course, social enterprise grown out of what was started by our Garland Butte Council and now provides outdoor education. And what I was fascinated by was the preschool education with expansion of over 600 hours a year in terms of the government's policy. And Stramash are taking advantage of that, and as well as providing their service here in Oban. I was delighted to hear they're opening my own constituency in Elgin, so that's great news, and also in Fort William as well. And they find they're getting an open door with many of the local authorities, clearly now taking steps to expand their childcare provision, and they're looking to experience the outdoor aspects of that. They have an open door in Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire Council, I was hearing, and they hope to expand across the country. So I think there's huge potential for Stramash. It's not just preschool, they deliver outdoor education in partnership with existing providers at secondary level, and they have a number of apprentices working for them as well, who I was very pleased to meet. Outdoor education, final point, and I know Angela's aware of this, people who learn outdoors and spend time out in the natural environment, all the evidence is it's absolutely fantastic for your educational experience, your personal development and your health and well-being. So it's absolutely fantastic, as I saw today, to play with the 3 and 4-year-olds in the middle of the countryside, overlooking the fantastic Oban Bay, and that's also a fantastic experience for the children, and we should indeed spread that across Scotland.
Angela, briefly, is there more we can do to support this?
Just very briefly, I mean, health and well-being is a core part of the curriculum. We have a curriculum that covers 3 to 18-year-olds. We've worked very hard to ensure that the vast majority of schools in Scotland meet their targets with regards to PE. As Richard says, health and well-being and physical activity actually helps to improve attainment, as does children having access to music tuition. So we do have to think about the curriculum in broad broad terms, that's at the essence of Curriculum for Excellence. It is, of course, about literacy and numeracy at the heart, because that's the gateway to all learning, but absolutely so is health and well-being. I'm sorry I couldn't join you this morning. I was speaking to teachers in Glasgow.
Shona, do you want to take the point about stillbirth rates?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very difficult issue, and I've met many families who have been through a stillbirth, and it is a tragedy in every circumstance. And I want to pay tribute to the organisations that support families in those circumstances. They do a really, really important job. Now, some progress has been made in reducing the number of stillbirths, but there's still more work to be done. We've started a review of maternity services and looking at particularly prenatal support, and what more can be done to support women right through their pregnancy to where it is possible to reduce the incidence of stillbirth. We still have a lot of, there's areas we still don't understand enough, and there's research still going on into some of the causes of stillbirth, which I think we still don't fully understand, and it's very difficult sometimes for parents not to be given any explanation because there isn't an obvious explanation. So a lot of work still to be done, and I'm happy to, if you want to leave your details at the end, we can send you some more information about that.
Okay, and John, do you want to take the point about young people?
On the issue of young people and their participation in elections, I think it's easy to forget that when we took forward the initiative to enable 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in the referendum, there was some pretty sharply divided opinions, and people thought we were at it, that we were somehow trying to get an advantage in the referendum. And when it came to, well, it never would be the case, but when it came to the consideration of extending the right of 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in Scottish parliamentary and local authority elections, Parliament voted for that legislation unanimously. Every single political party backed us. Why? Because the young people of this country had demonstrated beyond any doubt that they were fit and able to exercise their democratic rights responsibly, and we should be enormously proud of the 16 and 17-year-olds of our country who took part in that referendum so magnificently as they did. And So the first thing we've done in the aftermath of the referendum has been to pass that legislation to extend the ability of 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in the Scottish Parliament elections next May, and then the local authority elections the year after. To be fair, we were only able to do that because of good cooperation with the UK government to enable that legislation to be put through the UK Parliament by order, and then for us to consider the detailed legislation. And we're now going to follow that up by making sure that there is proper, dispassionate educational opportunities in all of our schools to enable young people to be properly informed before they cast their votes in the relevant elections. One of the points that came back to us after the referendum was that different schools in different parts of the country took different views about the degree to which there should be an open debate where young people were able to express their views within schools, or whether schools felt inhibited about the ability to actually have that discussion. And we want to make sure there's proper, dispassionate opportunities for young people to become aware of the political issues that they've got to judge upon, and to do that in a fashion that they can be informed as part of the wider debate. And in my own experience of being a Member of Parliament now over 18 years, when I go into schools to discuss the issues of the day and to be questioned by young people, I find immensely interested, aware and focused young people, and that's a very precious asset for us to have as a country. And one final point. At the Cabinet meeting which took place just before this session, without breaking the Official Secrets Act, we had a discussion which Alec Neil was leading about what we call democratic renewal. And that is about taking the lessons of the referendum, about how people got so engaged in debate and discussion, not just about politics, but about what our hopes are for our country, for our communities, for our localities, and how we can encourage that in every way we possibly can do. And we had an excellent discussion about that this afternoon, and we're determined to take that forward to make sure at every level of society we've got active participation in deciding how our country is governed and the choices that people are making, and that includes 16 and 17-year-olds being able to participate in that process.
Okay, I've had the signal from the back that says that in order to make sure we have time for folk to have individual discussions with Cabinet Secretaries, we're going to have one last round of questions. So we're going to have a final round of hands, and I'll try to take them from all over the room. There's a lady just, yep, you see you turn around, yep.
Hello, my name's Jo Bowis. This event has been a great community empowerment event for us here. Would it be possible for the Scottish Government to pay for councils to be able to live stream or even just record, and so that our communities can get more involved at our council level of local politics?
Okay, and right at the front here, yeah. And
hi, my name's Catherine Wilkie. I'm delighted you've had such a good day here today, and Argyll and Bute is a wonderful place. But we are one of the councils that is depopulating, and I would like to know what you, as the Scottish Government, is going to do for us to encourage other people to come here and live and share in our high-quality lives. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to take two more. I hope that's okay. So there's a lady right at the back, and just, yeah. And then the young guy just there. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, my name is Mary Jean Devon, and I'm Policy Lead for Integrated Health and Social Care for Argyll and Bute Council. I was privileged to be an invited guest at the Young Carers 3-day festival down in West Linton about 3 weeks ago. Myself and MSPs, over 700 young children ranging from the age of 10 upwards. These were all young carers, young people who've been denied a youth that our children that were here today at the summit. What was coming through from these young people was the lack of understanding at school for them. And First Minister, you spoke earlier about EMAs. EMAs are suspended if they're late for school X amount of days. Now, I don't need to tell you what the life these young carers have. They maybe are late for school because they've to put a parent back into bed before they leave. They might not be able to do their homework because they have two parents and maybe a sibling to look after. I said to one 12-year-old, you'll have so much to tell your mum and dad and brother when you go home today. A 3-day fantastic time. She said, no, I'll have 3 days washing to do. So I would ask you, First Minister, and your Cabinet to seriously consider that every school in Scotland has a National Young Carers Week, that we can educate our teachers and other children about what the life that our young carers have been denied. Thank you.
Hi there, my name's Jack. What's clear from tonight is that education is clearly a hot button issue with this local community. But my question features around a more national scale of teaching staff shortages in Scotland. Because what's clear is that while there is a staff shortage of teachers, nationally in deprived areas that number increases. And I just would like to ask what the Scottish Government is doing to try and invest and try to heal the shortage of teaching staff that we have, specifically in deprived areas, but on a national scale as well. Thank you.
4 excellent questions again. I'll maybe ask Alec Neil to talk a bit about the community empowerment and what more we can do, and he's looking at doing to try to extend that. I'm not sure it extends to paying councils to live stream. Some councils already do live stream their council meetings. I know Glasgow, where I come from, does that already. But anyway, Alec will look at that. John, can you take Catherine's point about depopulation? John chairs the council on the Highlands and Islands, Convention on the Highlands and Islands, and the last meeting of that was looking specifically at issues of depopulation. Shona, you can maybe talk about some of the support particularly the new legislation we're taking through to support carers and young carers. But can I just say, I think your idea about encouraging schools to raise awareness is an excellent idea, so that's one we'll definitely take away from here tonight. And lastly, Angela, I'll ask you to deal with, was it Jack's point about teacher shortages. So who was first, Alec?
Can I first of all say, Jill, I'll let you ask Dick Walsh later if he wants to pay for live streaming of Scottish Government events. We will encourage him to do so, obviously. Can I say more generally, we've got a fund of £19.5 million, which is an annual fund for community empowerment. And rather than get us to do something or get the council to do something, I would say to you, you put in an application for some funding from the Community Empowerment Fund, because that's what it's all about, that it comes from bottom up and not the politicians deciding what to do and what not to do. You put in an application for funding to empower your community either through live streaming or indeed in many other ways in which you can empower the community, and that will be looked at very seriously, because the whole point of that fund is to give the money to the communities to empower themselves, because by definition, empowerment will only work if the communities themselves do it and not rely on the politicians at either local or national level to do it. So I would encourage you to apply for at least some of that £19.5 million, although I can make no promises about dishing it out, because I don't take the decision. It's done independently. But that's the whole point of the fund, to empower communities like yours to do what you think is necessary to empower your community.
Okay.
On Catherine's question, the population of Scotland has increased since 2002 by 5.6%, but the population of Argyll and Bute has declined by 3.7% at the same time. So that's the statistics that illustrate the challenge that we have here. Across the Highlands and Islands, we are now seeing the repopulation. So essentially, population is growing across the whole of the Highlands and Islands, but there's a particular challenge in Argyll and Bute, and the local authority has taken forward an initiative to focus on the issue of depopulation and how to reverse that particular trend. There are a number of things that I think we can do to help here. The first one is digital. In the latest economic downturn, for the first time since records began, the Highlands and Islands has outperformed the rest of Scotland has performed better than the rest of Scotland in the economic downturn. Why is that? It's because of digital connectivity. People have not had to leave the Highlands and Islands for the first time in history to find economic opportunity in a downturn. They've been able to sustain their work because of digital connectivity. So that's why it's so important we roll out this technology. Secondly, it's about education, and particularly about the University of the Highlands and Islands. I was delivering a speech in a lecture hall in Elgin, actually, a few months ago. The principal of the college told me that before I had spoken in there, that room had been used as the venue for a lecture that was beamed out to 40 different locations across the Highlands and Islands because of technology. So what that says is that education at higher and further education levels can continue to be delivered in communities without people having to leave to get education, which has historically been the challenge of the Highlands and Islands. The third thing, and I think perhaps this is probably the most challenging, is about housing. Because it's not something entirely within our gift, although Alec and Margaret Burgess, the Housing Minister, take particular decisions to advantage rural areas in terms of the availability of social housing. But the availability of social housing is critical to enabling people to make decisions to live in a locality, to be able to sustain employment in a locality. And if you have a, if all of my three things work perfectly together, someone can get a decent education in the Highlands and Islands, they can secure a job through digital connectivity, but if they haven't got anywhere to live, then the whole thing falls apart. So housing, and this is an issue the local authority and its planning considerations must be particularly mindful of, and we try to take forward in our social housing agenda, is designed to advance all of that activity. So I think that the ways that we tackle the issue of depopulation is by making sure there is economic opportunity and there are ways in which people can find education and to be connected to the outside world, but we have to pursue that as a joined-up exercise between housing providers, the government and the local authority to make sure that we deliver on that aspiration of reversing the trend of depopulation in Argyll and Bute.
Okay, thanks, John. And
well, like you, May, I attended the Young Carers Festival about 5 years ago when I was Minister for Public Health, and it was a really humbling experience speaking to young carers and the life pressures that they face really beyond their years. And on the back of our recognition that we needed to support young carers more, there was a lot of work done at that time to raise awareness not just in schools but elsewhere about the needs of young carers so that young carers could be identified and supported and really to avoid the situation that you described arising if there's an issue with attendance at any time. And we also have funded young carers services and projects to really make sure that young carers have that support. The Carers Bill that is going through Parliament at the moment is another opportunity to strengthen the rights of carers and to ensure that they get the support that they require. I think we want to take that opportunity to raise awareness again, and I certainly will take away your suggestion about a National Young Carers Week or whatever we can do to yet again raise awareness, whether that's in schools or elsewhere, about the particular needs of young carers. So thanks very much for your suggestion, and we'll make sure it's taken forward. Thank you.
okay, and lastly, Angela.
Yeah, and just to quickly add on to Shona's contribution with regards to young carers and educational maintenance allowance, myself and Michael Matheson, when we were in different roles in government, 2 years ago went to the Young Carers Festival in West Linton, and the issue that the lady raises about educational maintenance allowance, because it is linked to attendance, and rightly so, does of course create additional issues for young carers. And one of the things that Michael and I did afterwards is we worked with the Scottish Youth Parliament, who had a very effective campaign on that matter, and we revised the guidance on educational maintenance allowance that went out to all directors of education and other organisations. So if that guidance isn't being followed or implemented, I will be very interested to hear examples of that, because we issue guidance for a purpose, and there are, very good reasons why young carers need additional support. And the announcement that the First Minister, Annabel Ewan, made today, that the Youth Employment Minister, about educational maintenance allowance now being available to students who are studying part-time, is of course a very helpful move that will assist young carers who can only study part-time as well. In terms of the issue with regards to teacher shortages, teacher unemployment in Scotland is at its lowest, and it's the lowest of any of the home nations in the UK. That, of course, is a good issue. We don't want to have unemployed teachers, but it does create additional challenges because there isn't an excess supply of teachers. And the issue of where there are shortages, it's not so much in areas of deprivation, it is more to do with geography. The northeast of Scotland, where the cost of living is particularly high for young teachers, and of course in the southwest of Scotland, Argyll and Bute, Dumfries and Galloway, where there are the additional issues of rurality, and there are particular subjects in terms of physics and Gaelic that are challenging as well in some areas of the country. So the Scottish Government has a lead responsibility in terms of workforce planning. We do that in partnership with local government. And for the 4th year running, we are increasing the number of student teachers. So the number of people going to study to become teachers has increased for the 4th year running. we're also working very hard with the University of Highlands and Islands and local authorities to create other routes into teaching. And in the North East there is a programme called Delight, and that's looking at classroom assistants that are based in the North East. They live in the North East, they've got an investment in their community there to train up classroom assistants to become teachers. And that programme is proven to be particularly effective. There are also financial incentives available for probationary teachers to waive their preference. Teachers who've come out of initial teacher education can express up to so many preferences in terms of where they'll do their probationary year. However, there's quite substantial financial incentives for probationary teachers to go to other parts of the country where they're needed. And my final point, and this is quite important, and there's a good example of it in Murray, which I think Richard Lochhead had a crucial hand as a local Murray MSP in arranging, and that is about the support available in particular to young teachers who've perhaps lived all their life in the Central Belt, have perhaps went to university in Glasgow or in Edinburgh, and then to support them in a move up to the North East, where we know that the cost of living is high, and Murray have done some very innovative work in terms of accommodation for teachers, and I know Richard certainly negotiated part of that. So there's a lot going on to address teacher shortages where they exist.
Angela, before I hand back to Joe to wrap up, I wanted just to do two things very briefly. First is to note that there are two ministers here who are obviously doing a particularly good job because they haven't had any questions tonight. So I thought I'd give both of them plaudits for that. These public sessions are interesting because they never follow a set pattern. So every time we do one, there's one or two ministers that get loads and loads of questions and one or two ministers that don't get any, and it's never the same ministers on either side at any time. But both Fiona and Annabelle have been, in fact, so that the audience have heard from every minister here, in a few sentences. Do you want to just both of you say what you've been doing in Oban today, Fiona?
Yeah, first of all, I went to visit Mary's Meals, a great charity making big impacts worldwide, based here in Argyll and Bute. So I met Malcolm there and heard of their great work. Went to Dunstafnus Castle. Visitor numbers, you'll be pleased to hear, are big improvement and moving forward. And of course with the Gatehouse now obviously reopened, refurbished, again people can have more of a stay there. So good news for Argyll and Bute in the area, and particularly for Oban. Great to hear about the figures for Dunstafnage.
Annabelle.
Yes, well, I started off the day with the First Minister at Oban High School, and it was an absolute pleasure to go there. There was a great feeling in the school, as the First Minister said, great energy. I had great conversations with some of the young people. I then attended the Offices of Skills Development Scotland, and there was a group of young people who have been benefiting from a bit of help under the Employability Fund, which helps with work readiness skills, and we had a very good chat about what was working and what perhaps we could look at trying to improve. And then lastly, I went on board the Klansman, and I got up to the bridge. I wasn't allowed to touch anything, so that was okay. That was to mark CalMac receiving its accreditation as a living wage employer. So I had a great day out in Oban, and of course the sun was shining too, so it was great.
Thanks, Annabelle. And the last thing I want to do is just thank you again for coming along, and thank you for your questions. They've been really fantastic and very important questions. I hope you feel we have done our best to answer your questions. If there are points you feel weren't fully addressed or additional points you want to raise, we'll all be around for a little while longer, so feel free to buttonhole all of them, and me as well if you want. But thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here in Oban with you this evening.